Hi, and welcome to Atlas Network with Michael Carnuccio. I'm so excited about the conversation this week. I was able to sit down and have a pretty lengthy conversation with Alexander Zibzibadze from Georgia's Future Academy. Now, we met in the safety and security of Brussels, Belgium, because of the oppression that's happening right now in Georgia. In fact, some things that were happening to members of Alexander's team and his friends while we were recording in Brussels. I think you're going to be fascinated in this episode where we talk about how Georgia's Future Academy is able to reach and empower the youth movement throughout Georgia. I think you're going to find it pretty powerful, his story of hope going through the oppression that they're facing right now. And then you're going to enjoy, as I did, some exciting news about the Europe Liberty Award. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I had fun with Alexander and Georgia's Future Academy.
This is Atlas Network with Michael Carnuccio.
Hello, and welcome to Atlas Network with Michael Carnuccio. I'm excited to bring you our conversation today from Brussels in Belgium, where we're going to have an excited, spirited conversation about something that we all don't know enough about and we need to be paying more attention to. And of course, that is the liberty movement that is happening in Georgia. And to have that discussion with us today is the founder and chairman of Georgia's Future Academy, Alexander Zibzibadze. Thank you so much, Alexander, for being with us today.
Hello, Michael, and thank you for having us. It's a pleasure.
Well, let's start with Georgia's Future Academy, right? You're the founder, and in the chairman role had been CEO before. Obviously, this is a passion project for you. Tell us about the organization and the mission.
Yeah, we started Georgia's Future Academy in 2015, so this year we'll become 10 years old. So we'll not be a baby organization anymore.
Right.
And the whole idea why me and my friends decided to found it back in 2015, Georgia had a lot of experience with classical liberal reforms and was one of the major champions in advancing liberal reforms, especially after the 2003 Rose Revolution. But as the experience has showed us, those reforms were conducted from a top-to-down approach. So there was a lot of buy-in from the leadership in the country at that time, but not from the population. And even a few years after these reforms, its architect, Kacha Bedukidze, who was a very famous libertarian reformer in the world, he felt himself that one of the major problems was that you really need the popular support. You need the grassroots support to be able to effectively keep those reforms in place and to prevent them from being dismantled. So that's why in 2015, especially after we got a new populist left-wing government, which was dismantling many of those achievements, which the libertarian reformists did throughout the first decade of 2000s, we thought that it's very important to educate young people and to spread the idea of liberty and to build a network of people who would be constant advocates and defenders of these ideas. And that's how the GFA started.
I want to talk a little bit about the genesis, again, of the Academy. But before we do that, maybe a little bit more about today. What is the work of the Academy? What's the focus of Georgia's Future Academy?
Yeah, so we have to be an adaptive organization.
Sure.
So the situation in Georgia, unfortunately, during the past few years, especially after the Ukrainian invasion started and after our government aligned itself with pro-Russian political forces, was deteriorating in terms of liberty and individual freedoms for many. So we had to adjust our strategy, and mostly now we mobilize young people and we support our network to oppose a lot of crazy policies and laws which are effectively targeting our essential freedoms and liberties. So at the moment, that's the fight we're in for the last 2 or 3 years. And because of that, we kind of became a prominent nationwide organization. So it's one of the most talked organizations, but also one of the major enemies of our authoritarian government, because they really see the power of network and the power of several thousand young people who collectively oppose the type of regulations which they bring. And that's, I think, our major focus at the moment.
Some of our listeners and viewers may not quite understand what it's like in Georgia right now. You mentioned some of the oppression, some of the challenges. I wonder if you can help them understand what life is like and what those challenges are like, because it helps highlight the importance of all of the young people standing up together. So if you can talk about it, what is it like in Georgia right now?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the situation in Georgia starts to remind us more of the situation in countries like Russia and Belarus. And to give more specific examples, for example, you can be fined for criticizing government on Facebook or on Twitter. You could get into jail for receiving any funding or support from international organizations or any donor from outside of the country. You get a fine which equals 5 average monthly salaries for participating in a protest.
5 months of salaries for participating in a public
protest. So it's a massive repressive apparatus. If you want to get any funding from abroad, if the government has to approve it first, and if the government doesn't give permission for a donor organization, then you're not allowed to take the money. So that's the environment which has been created in Georgia during the last 2.5 years. All liberty advocates are called foreign agents. We have to live with this label, and the government is constantly trying to impose this label on us. And we live in this kind of civil disobedience campaigns all the time because we don't agree with those laws. We deny them. We are not complying with them. And it's a very dangerous situation. We have a lot of cases also where people were physically assaulted. So, for example, one of our board members was physically attacked by pro-government people who were not identified until now. It was more than a year now. So this is the price and the environment in which the people who support democracy, people who support the ideas of liberty operating in Georgia at the moment.
And so yet in the face of that, not just the threat or the possibility of arrest and fines, but also physical violence. And you're saying in the face of that, you found so much success growing and getting young people to stand up. Why is that? Why do you think that is, that there's such momentum that's happening in Georgia?
Yeah, so first of all, we feel that we have to do something about it, right? Yeah. So for us, we understand that it's fight for our nation. Our country has been in that fight for a long time. It's been part of the communist regime, and we were forcefully occupied. It was not the decision of Georgian people. It was the Russians who came and occupied us. And we know how this fight is like. Our ancestors have been fighting this fight, so we continue this fight for liberty and our independence. And in terms of your question, I think it's in Georgia one of the major advantages which we have because of our communist past. Even the left-wing parties and authoritarian parties, they would never call themselves communists or socialists. So these ideas are very hard to sell in Georgian society.
Sure.
So we have a big success when you promote the ideas of freedom because it's historically resonates with young people. And also, in general, the young people are this kind of group in society who always try to oppose the authority. When somebody tells them, like for doing something, you'll get a fine, for them it means that it's a right thing.
Time to do something, right, exactly.
So that's why I think it's growing successful, but also we try to build a network. It's very important for us that it's networking individuals who support themselves. And a lot of young people who come to our organization and who participate in different programs, trainings, or other activities, they feel belonging to the organization. We always try to cultivate this common identity for people, and this identity based on ideas in which they all believe. They're obviously all different, distinct individuals who have their own life paths and future, and also the past as well. But they really feel united, and they feel that there are other people who, like them, fight against those illiberal tendencies.
This is not your first organization that you've started for change in Georgia. And you mentioned before some of the challenges that organizations face. I know you have personally had to deal with that. Do you mind talking about that at all? What predated Georgia's Future Academy and the experience that you had?
Yeah, so it's a common story in Georgian civil society space at the moment. So I think it's important for people to understand. Prior to Georgia's Future Academy, we had an organization which was named Franklin Club.
The Franklin Club, right.
After Benjamin Franklin, so I think it should resonate with a lot of American viewers. And why we named it after Benjamin Franklin, because he was a classical liberal, but also he was a man of many talents. So we felt when we were starting that we wanted to have like people who have different talents and viewpoints, and he kind of embodied this idea.
Sure.
So it was similar to Georgia's Future Academy. There were some differences, but yeah, then because of the Franklin Club's success, which also very fast became one of the most prominent organizations in the liberty space in Georgia, the government, which felt threatened by it,
Right.
did everything possible to force the organization into an operational mode, basically. And those things included intimidation of founders. It included different threats. It included financial rewards and bribes. So there was a lot of mechanisms which government tries to stop such kind of movements. So we learned our lessons as well. It was kind of bad experience, but we learned, and now we are very, very careful, especially in legal terms, because you have to be very, very careful how you choose your partners, and to make sure that there are a lot of legal cautious, which makes it harder for you to become vulnerable.
I'm listening to you describing what you've gone through and the challenge and what happened with an organization that you were passionate about, having impact, and then it faced so much pressure and it had to disband. And most people would say, well, we tried, job well done. Especially, candidly, you're very accomplished, very educated, you've traveled the world, you're in demand and have opportunity, and yet you immediately start a new organization and lean in to try to help Georgia. Why is that? What is it that is driving you so much about Georgian society?
Well, it's some kind of mission for many Georgians. For me, it's also my personal thing. My grandfathers were killed during Stalin's repressions, fighting for freedom and liberties, which we're currently fighting for. So we always feel that it's a continuation of our future, and also
Sure.
For me, it's a way to give back to my society. I feel that there's a lot of opportunities to advance freedom in Georgia. And also you always feel, and you ask yourself a question, if not me, who will do that? And sometimes you realize that you're the person who should get involved. And despite all the risks, we know that they're there. We're constantly operating under threats of detention, fines, and propaganda, which is sometimes maybe even more brutal than fines and detentions.
Sure.
It's for us, our fight for our identity. We felt that our identity is based on ideas of liberty and Christianity as well, and we're protecting that.
When you talk about propaganda, what does that look like? Because I think some of our viewers and everyone understands it a little differently in their societies around the globe. So in the worldwide freedom movement, there's always fights against government propaganda, but it looks different. What does that look like in Georgia today?
Yeah, so it mimics a lot this Russian KGB type of Soviet propaganda. There is no way you can influence it. It's very close space. You would never get a live interview, for example, to defend your position. If you do an interview, they will always try to cut it in a way. And the best you can do, and I have done it a couple of times, when you give somebody an interview for an hour and a half for the government propagandists, and they don't cut anything at all. And then they just say that they gave this type of comment and just lie that you didn't say something. They don't even give like a cut of your speech or something. They can create completely false stories. They could somehow create stories about your personal life. They can try to manipulate things about your sexual orientation, about your family, about your personal finances. They can post a photo saying that you're meeting with somebody, and then you're not on the photo, but they say that it's you.
This is the deep fake we hear about
Yes.
all the time.
Yeah, the deep fake photos and videos and stuff, and that's the reality in which we operate. So it takes a lot of courage also to oppose this propaganda.
You mentioned courage, and courage is the word that I've been thinking of. I'm sure several others have. But there's also a hope in your voice and in your story. What gives you hope? What is driving you?
Yeah, so I think the most important hope is the young people, but also kind of this Gen Z and millennial generations in
Sure.
Georgia. if you look at all the opinion polls and the mentality, and despite all the propaganda and all the work which government is doing through schools and universities to kind of change mentality and affect the young people with ideas, still more than 90% of Georgians choose Georgia's European future. They choose the democracy and ideas of liberty over the ideas of tyranny. So we are sure that eventually the liberty would defend the tyranny in Georgia. The question is how fast will that happen? And we try to make sure that it's faster than later.
Alexander, you mentioned that part of this hope and part of the drive that you have and other Georgians have is their ideals, but it's also their passion and maybe their faith. Help us understand what it is that in the face of such opposition and such pressure that has people driving and continuing to get louder and supporting the call for democracy and liberal ideals.
Yeah, I think for Georgians, there are a few pillars on which our society stands.
Okay.
So one pillar is this idea of fighting for freedom. Right. And that's, we always say it's part of our DNA, because for centuries our ancestors were fighting against various empires who would always try and come and enslave us, be that, I don't know, like Romans or Alexander the Great, and going all the way to Russians, Iran, Turkey, and so on. Right. But so that's one big idea. So people always believe that at some point the freedom would win in Georgia. So that's a very big part of our identity. Even the word freedom in Georgia means tavisupluva, which means the right to own yourself, if you literally translate it.
Yeah.
So it's
tavisupluva.
Tavisupluva. Yeah. And then also the second pillar is Christianity. So Georgia is a deeply Christian nation. We're one of the first Christian nations, which converted in Christianity in 326. Wow. So it's been almost 1,700 years since the Christian nation, and the Christian morality and the Christian values is a very important for Georgian people, and all these autocratic ideas and beliefs are incompatible with that. Incompatible with the teachings of the Bible, and that's, I think, for Georgian people, Europe and the Western civilization is a natural home, and we always feel that our part is where the free nations are. That's why we continue the fight, and that's kind of the ideological and identity part for Georgian politics. So I want to ask you about just the nature of what the process for Georgia's Future Academy is like right now, and how someone can get involved and partner. I'm sure many of our listeners, viewers right now, are captivated by the fight that you have, inspired by your story, as I know I am, and they want to help. And so how can they partner with you? Yeah, first of all, I think it's a good idea to visit our website, which is futureacademy.g. futureacademy.g. And then you could email us, and we can include you in our newsletter, which we do monthly for all parties interested to learn more about what's going on in Georgia and how they can help in general to the process, but also to Georgia's Future Academy in particular. And then, after this newsletter, we can get in touch, and we always are happy to talk with people and share our experiences and ideas and see how they can help us. It could be spreading more words, writing to your congressmen or members of parliament sometimes. It could be some small or big donations. So it's many ways that you can support us, and we really value all contributions, no matter how big or small. So futureacademy.g is a way you can get involved, but also atlasnetwork.org. You can learn more about Georgia's Future Academy and other partners of Atlas Network. And Alexander, that's where I'd like to go now in the conversation, is this partnership between Georgia's Future Academy and Atlas Network. How did that partnership come to be for you? Why are you involved in Atlas Network? What does it matter? Yeah, so when we started our organization and our fight, we felt like we understood that it's not only the Georgian problem. Fighting for freedom and liberty, it's a global phenomena, and we were looking for a network where we find organizations who operate in similar scenarios and have similar challenges. It could be a little bit different in some contexts, but the idea and the big fight is the same. So Atlas Network naturally stood out. We also usually are skeptical of any government funds. So we're very happy that Atlas Network is an organization which only accepts individual donations and or private individuals and organizations. So it's not government funded because of that, it was a natural fit for us, and we really wanted to join the network. We applied, and since then, for the last almost 5 years, we've been actively involved, and we learned a lot from many partners. I think the best part of it, besides all the support which Atlas Network provides, is also the ability to share your experiences, but also to learn, because this is not even like our fight. It's in general, it's like a fight against authoritarianism imposed by totalitarian regimes like Russia and China. So those regimes always try to impose their ideas in the neighborhoods, and we see the same tendencies in Ukraine. We see the same tendencies in Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, Hungary, Slovakia, and so on. And it's very valuable for us to talk and work and partner with people who fight for the same ideas in their own countries.
So the coach, compete, celebrate model that Atlas Network has, you're touching on some of those. Has there been anything in the last 5 years that stood out as an experience for you or one of your colleagues with Georgia's Future Academy that kind of highlights that value in the Atlas Network model?
Yeah, so I think the specific great examples, we've been involved in many things. So, for example, we found it really valuable to learn how to do partnerships and fundraising, for example. For us, it was a new thing. We didn't know properly how to ask for support or for funds, and that was very valuable. It was also very valuable to use the Atlas Network forums in a good way. I mean, like the Europe Liberty Forums, the Liberty Forum and Freedom Dinner in New York City, as a platform to promote the Georgian cause, and also to get very valuable insights from many people who attend those events, and they always give us advice and some support. So that was, in many ways, I think there's unique, because you cannot really find such kind of support anywhere else.
You mentioned the Europe Liberty Forum, and we happen to be attending that forum together. And part of the compete element that Atlas Network has is where organizations are selected and their work is recognized, and they find themselves competing for an annual award. You have been selected, Georgia's Future Academy, is one of the finalists for this year's Europe Liberty Award. What does that mean when you and the organization found out that you were being recognized?
When we first attended the Europe Liberty Award in 2022, me and a few of our board members, we felt that we have to work really hard, because at some point we would like to be nominated for the award.
Wow.
So we felt like that. We didn't expect at the time the situation in Georgia would become that bad.
Sure.
And then, to be honest, it's a great honor and also a surprise for us that we were nominated to be the finalist. But I think it's also recognition of the work which our organization does. We're not a typical think tank at the moment, and don't get us wrong, we would like to be. We would like to be the ones who are dismantling bad regulations, who are promoting some policy and operating like a normal, typical think tank organization, but we're more kind of this grassroots pro-liberty movement at the moment, which tries to mobilize people and oppose the authoritarian regime, basically. And it's a big recognition for our work, but even more importantly, recognition of the work of thousands of people who are involved with our organization. And they're very excited about this, and already being a finalist is a big achievement for us, because it means that Atlas Network and our partners really value the work which we do. So that's very important for us.
So Georgia's Future Academy, a finalist for the Europe Liberty Award. I have to ask you, if you were to win the award, what would that mean for Georgia?
I think for Georgia would mean that pro-liberty movement globally recognizes the fight in which we are. And also it would mean a lot to almost 60 political prisoners who we have. I think, first of all, we would dedicate this award to them, because they took a very big personal price. They're in jail at the moment. Some of them are our past activists or current activists as well.
Really?
And we would dedicate it to them. While we were talking during this podcast, the major libertarian politician in Georgia is on trial in the court, and he could be detained in a couple of hours. And so we will dedicate it to all the people who fight for freedom, but especially the ones who took a very high personal cost. And sometimes it means being in jail, And also, it would also mean that our Ukrainian friends who are fighting for the liberty, that their fight is also very important, because we always say that it was not for Ukraine. It would be much harder to continue to do what we are, because Ukrainians are also making it possible for Georgians to try and protect our liberties, because otherwise it would be very hard to oppose the Russian tyranny, which Russia is basically enforcing in Georgia through its kind of pro-Russian aligned regime.
So I have to ask you on this point. You've brought up your Ukrainian partners, but you have other partners throughout Atlas Network that are watching and learning from you. As you just mentioned, you're learning from them. What advice would you have for a fellow chair or founder or CEO of an organization that maybe starts facing some pressure or is trying to think about how to do their think tank differently? What would you suggest?
I think it's very important first to ask your question, why are you in this fight? And what is the limit? And it's your personal decision. Because for us, we all ask our questions like, are we ready, for example, to go to jail if that's a necessity? And then you, based on your answer to those questions, you should choose the most plausible strategy. And I also say that it's individual decisions. So different people take different decisions. And the second thing is also to be bold and not to self-censor. Recently, we've seen this tendency in general that a lot of people, because of different political pressures, try to self-censor themselves. So I think it's very important to continue advocate to what you believe and not try to kind of hide those ideas because maybe it's not fitting the political reality at one point or another. For many think tanks like ours, yeah, if we really wanted, we could have been cooperating with the authoritarian regime and maybe even promoting some small pro-liberty changes, which we could sell as wins. But you should look at the overall picture, and you should understand that it's very important to be bold and to advance your idea, and also be very clear how you articulate your ideas and not be afraid to oppose and to stand for what is right. That's very important.
We're talking with the founder and chairman of Georgia's Future Academy, which is nominated for this year's Europe Liberty Award. They're one of the finalists. And Alexander, I have to ask you, something you mentioned before was about the focus on young people. So you have an organization that is really engaging young people, trying to give them an outlet, but that's important, that generation. Why is that? Why is it that for Georgia's future, you're going after the next generation?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. First of all, I think I was very lucky because when I was young, I met a lot of amazing reformers and liberty thinkers who empowered us to do things. And since then, I understood that we as young people have a lot of power. And we try to continue this process. And especially for us, it's very important to advocate for this millennial and G generations in Georgians. And the key difference between those generations and the previous generations in Georgia is that they were born an independent and free Georgian state, because the previous generations were born in Soviet Union. So those people understand the value of liberty and freedom.
Sure.
It's for them, it's kind of natural part of their identity. They don't remember what it's like to live in tyranny, kind of. Now we have to fight against it again because the tyranny is coming back. But I think that's our natural allies, because for them, liberty is so important and the freedoms so important. They're really ready to fight. And also, in general, I think the young people are the ones who have a lot of energy and passion. And I think it's very important to involve them more in liberty movements. So that's what we're always advocating with our partners. We're saying we should involve young people more, because they at times teach us great things. We always learn from them. Even the guys who are like in early teens, like for example, our organization now uses TikTok a lot. And we never thought about doing it. And then at some point, a few of our activists came to us and told us, look, we're really losing this fight for liberty fight on TikTok. We should do something about it. And we said, okay, we'll give you a platform. And it was a very successful engagement. Actually, with the support of Atlas Network, we launched our TikTok channel, which reached more than 10 million views in 2.5 months. And for us, it was also fascinating because we didn't expect that you can do such thing with a couple $1,000s.
You're talking about TikTok and other forums to engage young people, but I have to ask you about this pin that you're wearing. It's, I believe, of a phoenix, and this is another program that you've partnered with Atlas Network for. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so in general, I always was a fan of the phoenix, of the creature which always managed to reborn itself from the ashes. But in this case, Phoenix resonates with our new projects, which we launched a couple of months ago. And the whole idea was to name it with a name which resonates with young people. So we named it after the famous Harry Potter book, Order of the Phoenix.
Order of the Phoenix.
And
sure.
We tried to create our own Order of the Phoenix in Georgia, which for young people resonates really well with the fighter in, and it promotes the idea that by fighting authoritarian regimes, they kind of fight their Voldemort or Death Eaters. And the idea of the Order of the Phoenix is to equip young people with the skills and knowledge which they're required to effectively operate in authoritarian settings. So we teach them things like how to deal with police, courts, and law enforcement. What are your rights and what he can do in case you're detained or stopped on the street and so on. We teach them how to do a mental resilience and how to build mental resilience, because it's not the easiest situation to operate in. It's very stressful for many young people, especially.
Of course.
Also, we teach them about digital hygiene, like, for example, how to have secure communications, how to make sure that it's harder for government to intervene and to read your messages, how to make it harder for them to do these things. We teach young people what's the difference between democratic and autocratic regimes and how they operate in terms of governance, in terms of economic structures, in terms of societal opportunities and pressures and so on. We teach them about the importance of the ideas of freedom and liberty and why those ideas are very important for the essential success for any society. And that's basically by this project, we try to make sure that the young people remember why it's important to have a society based on the ideas of liberty, but also how to survive in authoritarian setting and how to effectively oppose it.
So I'm picturing, if I was in Georgia today walking around, I would see young people with a Phoenix pin or a shirt or something, almost in the famous trilogy, The Hunger Games, where they would hold up a symbol to communicate and say that, like, hey, I'm part of this resistance effort. Is that kind of what you're building there with young people through the project?
Yes, they have the ordens, actually, not usually the pins, but after they participate in our training program and after they graduate, they become a member of the order.
Wow.
And they got a specific order. And in order to attend specific events and activities, they have to be the members. So it also creates this exclusivity and makes it very trendy and fancy to be the member of it.
Can folks learn more about the Order of the Phoenix at futureacademy.g?
Yes, they can, and also on our Facebook and Instagram, which is Georgia's Future Academy.
So Georgia's Future Academy, where you can learn more, or go to atlasnetwork.org, and you can learn more about Georgia's Future Academy, their programs, and other partners of Atlas Network. Let me ask you just a few kind of final questions here as we've talked through your journey and what the experience has been like for you and your colleagues. Talk to me about what the future looks like. What are your hopes and thoughts about not just the rest of this year, but as we finish out the decade, where does Georgia go in the world stage?
Yeah, so I think in short term, we have to learn and be adaptive to the new reality. And it's very important to make sure that the liberty movement in Georgia survives.
Yeah.
So it's not crushed by authoritarian regimes. And that's our kind of major goal at the moment. But in the medium and long term, we believe that the liberty will prevail in Georgia eventually. And it's very important to be ready and have a strong grassroots movement. So when the moment comes and the liberty defeats the tyranny, we're ready to engage in comprehensive pro-liberty reforms, and we are ready to once again be one of the beacons of liberty and democracy in the region and in the world. And that's what a lot of Georgians are striving for. That's the future in which Georgia would be the member of European Union and NATO, which would finally create a shield for us to protect from Russian and Chinese influence, and also to be the future of Georgia in which Georgians live in a prosperous life. For me, always my motto when I talk to my students, I say that I want to see Georgian society in which every parent is able to afford to take their child to Disneyland at least once per year if they want to. And that's the type of prosperity which we want to achieve. And I believe that in my lifetime we will see that.
This is one of those areas where we talk about freedoms that many take for granted, that you all are fighting for, and it's the future and the hope that you have for Georgia. Let me ask you a couple questions just about leadership. I always like to talk with my guests on the podcast about how they approach leadership and what's defined them as a leader. Obviously, Alexander is resilient as a leader. Where does that come from for you personally?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. One is my family and background. It's very important. I was always free to pursue and do whatever I want. There was no family pressures on me, and also the history of my family being oppressed by the authoritarian regimes obviously makes you a perfect kind of candidate to oppose the new authoritarian one. That's part of your identity. Then also, I think it was a very foundational moment in my upbringing when I was 15 years old, and I went for an exchange to the United States, to Arizona in particular, and I was introduced to the ideas of Ayn Rand, Hayek, and Mises by my high school teachers in Arizona.
Really?
And that's when a lot of ideas which I believe in now, I started to read the books, and that was also very foundational. And then the third thing, I think it's also, in general, you always ask this question, what do you want to achieve in life? And I feel that Georgia gives me a lot of opportunities to promote liberty, and somebody has to do it. So ideally, maybe, if somebody else could do some things which I'm doing, I would be happy to give the floor to them. But you see the opportunity and you take it. And it's very important too, because if now everyone would think, okay, somebody else would do it. And usually people have these tendencies, right? Why should I be the one who propaganda is attacking? Or why should I be the one who takes the risks? If everyone thinks like this, nothing would happen. So it's kind of entrepreneurial in a way. And I always say that we're idea entrepreneurs. And for us, this idea is to make sure that for once and for all, Georgia's liberty is protected. And that's only capable if we finally somehow break with this Russian and Chinese influence and make sure that Georgia becomes the integral part of the liberty world globally.
You've mentioned this idea of taking risks and facing challenge. And so a lot of leaders, when they take risk with their organization, they're risking maybe donor support, and they're trying to figure out how would they build additional support. Or they're risking maybe a little bit of brand recognition. They're putting their name on the line behind a particular idea. You're talking about something much more personal in a risk where you're talking about jail or personal threats. And you mentioned before coming to grips with this, are you willing to go to jail over your ideas? If you had another leader in Atlas Network of a partner organization that came to you and said, I'm facing that situation, what advice would you give them from your own story?
Well, I think it's very important to be coherent and to continue the fight. I think it's when you believe in something and you really believe in these ideas, you should be ready to pay the price, the ultimate price. We understand that, but also you have to be strategic about it. Obviously, like going to jail, nobody wants that. It's not something we just strive for.
Right.
Even when you think about it, you probably would think, okay, would me going to jail make any difference? And I think we should be very strategic about this type of decisions, and I would advise them to think carefully about what their long-term plan is and how they plan to achieve the ideas which I believe in, but also to think that abandoning the fight could be sometimes detrimental for a lot of people who are in their networks. For me, it's not only about myself, but it's about responsibility for the team, for our board, but even more importantly to the thousands of young people who we work with. So we have to serve as ideals and for them, and we have to serve that's what kind of leaders look like. So when you make these decisions, we realize that we have to be good examples.
Do you feel that your leadership right now is a burden that you have to bear, or do you feel that it is an opportunity for a future that you desire?
Well, I think it's definitely a privilege because it's, in a way, you feel that when you feel the trust of people, and it doesn't matter how many of them, it could be tens, hundreds or thousands, it feels very empowering. And you realize that those people need you. And that's a big privilege when you feel the trust of the people in you. And that's what kind of drives our fight. We realize that if the people are standing behind you, you're doing something right. And that's why I say it's always a privilege, it's definitely not a burden, it's a choice. And we're very privileged to get this opportunity to fight.
I feel like I have to ask you this question. I don't know why, but it's just hearing so much passion and courage from you. If you weren't involved with Georgia's Future Academy, what would you be doing?
Well, I'm sure that I would be fighting for liberty in Georgia or elsewhere, but more likely in Georgia. And before the Georgia's Future Academy, and as we said, we had another organization, Franklin Club. That's part of our identity because, I don't know, me and my friends and my colleagues and our network, we believe that that's kind of our major goal in life at the moment, and it's we're so invested in it, it's very hard to abandon it. So I cannot imagine doing something else. It's very hard. If I wanted, I could, because I have a lot of opportunities. I want to immigrate somewhere, start a career somewhere in some different sector, but this is something which is very fulfilling, and you also feel that you can make a big impact. And this impact, which comes with some personal costs and risks, it's still worth it. So for us, it's what makes us happy and makes us feel that we're doing something which is important, which would resonate and change lives and help and support a lot of people.
Alexander, I have to tell you how much I've appreciated this conversation. For Atlas Network, we are passionate about supporting and investing in partners of the worldwide freedom movement. Our heart and our drive is to see you all succeed and to grow together. But part of my passion is to help tell stories, to help elevate the personal stories of the leaders that are changing the world. And that's what you're doing. And so I want to make sure in the last few minutes that we have together that you get the last word. And so is there anything of your story, anything happening in Georgia, anything with Georgia's Future Academy that we haven't discussed that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I think I will just kind of wrap up and say that it's very important. And when we started this fight, we never thought that it would maybe end up in this type of situation when we were actually now thinking, could we continue or not? Will we be jailed or not? What's the price for attending an event like this? Because even by this current regulations and authoritarian laws, we're not technically allowed to attend events like
Really?
this. So, but then when you're involved and you feel the impact and passion, I think those things don't really matter that much. What matters is the results, and we see those results. Maybe sometimes they're not really evident. There will be a lot of lows, and it happens. Like we get sometimes stressed, and sometimes we feel anxious. But it's very important to, in those moments, to think about the big picture, what you're fighting for, and it always gives you strength. So I would advise everyone to think about it, and also to learn about what's going on in Georgia and the places like Georgia. It's not only about Georgia. Of course, it's about places like Ukraine. It's about places like Belarus. It's about places like North Korea, even Russia and China, and this type of regimes which imposes restrictions. But it's very important to understand. And also, I think the second very important thing is, especially for the pro-liberty movement, to understand one thing. Technically, we're all skeptical of any governments. And I'm like that, obviously. Whatever government wants to impose some regulation to something, I always take it with skepticism. And usually I naturally distrust any authority or government. But it's also very important to understand that some governments are much worse than others. And that's very important for pro-liberty to understand that the regimes like Putin's or like the regimes in Georgia, the Georgian Dream regime, Ivanishvili, it's incompatible with the regimes which we may not like in places like, I don't know, in some European countries or in some Western democracies, but they're very typically different and different sorts of evils. And it's so important to make this distinction because sometimes we have this tendency to kind of boil everyone in the same pot, and that creates very false conclusions. And please differentiate. At least I always tell my American and European friends that, of course, their governments are not perfect, but For example, in the US, you can always openly disagree about things.
Right.
In places like Russia or Belarus, you're jailed or sometimes killed or at least fined for disagreeing with the policy of the government. So even this already, I think it's a great example. But yeah, it's very important to see this context.
Sure.
And this type of regimes, they always try to somehow spread this kind of propaganda that, like every government is the same, nobody is perfect. But yeah, we have to make this distinction.
Right.
And that's very important. And also to understand that when we fight for pro-liberty, it's very important to oppose this type of totalitarian and authoritarian regimes, because they always fill the vacuum. And we see that in Europe, where they're trying to intervene in many different countries and to spread. It's like cancer,
Yeah.
Unless you somehow treat it with chemotherapy and the surgery, it's going to spread.
Right.
So it's very important for us to cure it. And the faster we do it, it's better.
Well, Alexander, thank you so much for your time and for the conversation. Your courage and the work that your team at Georgia's Future Academy is doing is truly inspiring. So thank you so much for your time and conversation today.
Thank you.
And folks, I'm sure you've been inspired by this discussion as well and maybe motivated to get involved. And so I want to remind you that you can partner with Alexander and his colleagues by going to futureacademy.g, or you can go to atlasnetwork.org, where you can donate to support organizations like Georgia's Future Academy and other partners in the worldwide freedom movement, or to find out how you can plug in and get involved. Until next time, I want to thank you for joining us on Atlas Network with Michael Carnuccio, and we'll have another great episode for you soon.